Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with blood orange marmalade. That's right, growing up I was not a fan of marmalade, since it was kind of firm and dense, had a bitter taste, and I could never figure out why it was filled up with chopped up pieces of what we used to throw away when we peeled an orange. But then one day I was served a marmalade that changed my life. Okay, that's a little strong, but it did change what I thought about marmalade, and I've been a huge fan of that style of marmalade since, which is exactly the kind I'm going to show you how to make in this video. And to get started, I'm going to go ahead and peel 5 blood oranges. But please note, any kind of citrus will work here. And just by habit, I usually take this green thing off the bottom, which I call the stem nipple, but I'm pretty sure that's not the actual name. But anyway, what we'll do is go ahead and peel all the skin off. And yes, it's totally fine if some of that white part comes with it. Oh, and I should probably mention, if you want a much stiffer, much firmer, probably more bitter marmalade, instead of just peeling off the zest, you can use the entire peel. But for this version, which as I mentioned is less bitter and much softer, I'm only going to use the zest and a little bit of the pith. But anyway, that's up to you. I mean, not only are you the Lady Marmalade of your marmalade, you're also the Patti LaBelle of how firm this should gel. But personally, I like using just mostly the zest. And then what we'll do once we peeled as much peel as we can peel, is we will transfer that into a saucepan, and then head to the stove, where we will add a whole bunch of fresh cold water. And then what we'll do once we have that pretty much filled up is set our heat on high and wait for this to come up to a simmer, at which point we'll adjust that down to low to medium low, or to whatever setting will maintain a nice gentle steady simmer. And what we're looking to do here is simmer this for about 45 minutes to an hour, or until those peels are very tender and easy to chop. And since we're always looking to multitask in the kitchen, while that's simmering we can go ahead and juice our oranges, which will begin by cutting them in half. And in case you're not familiar, that's why they call them blood oranges. But anyway, we'll go ahead and squeeze out as much juice as possible. And for that, I do like to use one of these citrus presses, which does a pretty good job of squeezing, plus it catches any seeds, although blood oranges don't usually have too many. And just as I was finishing this job, I remembered I had what's called a citrus reamer, which really is way more effective at getting more of the juice and pulp, and I decided to use it on these already squeezed halves to get even more. And yes, as I was doing this, I thought to myself, you really should have used that from the beginning. But hey, better late than never. And then once those have been juiced, we're going to do a little bit of math. Since we're going to measure how much juice we have, and then add exactly half that amount in water. Okay, so I had about a cup of juice, which is why I just added 1/2 cup of cold fresh water. And that's it, we'll just set that aside, and we'll go back and check our peels, which after about 45 minutes to an hour should be nice and tender. And if you're not sure, go ahead and test one. But I was sure. And what we'll do at this point is strain those out into a bowl. And we can go ahead and discard that water, but don't clean the pan, because we're going to use that again in a few minutes. And then once our peeled zest has been bowled, we will let that sit until it's cool enough to handle, at which point we will handle it. And by handle it, I mean slice it up nice and thin. So we'll take a sharp knife and do a little bit at a time. Of course, keeping our fingertips curled back and nowhere close to the blade. And we will slowly but surely slice this entire pile. And sure, if you wanted to, you don't have to slice. You could just chop this all up sort of randomly, which might be like a minute faster. But I think these nice thin strips look so much better. Plus, you just would have wasted that extra minute on your phone anyway. But in any event, once that zest has been sliced up, we will go ahead and transfer it into our juice. At which point we have to figure out exactly how much total volume we have, which in my case was just under 2 cups. And the reason is we're going to measure out an equal amount of white sugar, which is exactly what I did here. And that's it. The last ingredient, which is optional by the way, is a little bit of freshly squeezed lemon juice. And I'm only going to squeeze in about 1/2, but you could use a whole one, or even 2 if you want. Alright, that is just you cooking. And what we'll do once all that's set is head back to the stove, and dump everything back into our now empty saucepan. And we'll turn our heat back on to medium high, and we will give it a stir. And then we'll wait for this gloriously colored mixture to come up to a simmer. And then once it eventually does, we'll back our heat down to medium low, and we will cook it stirring occasionally, for I'm guessing like 30 to 40 minutes, or until it reduces and thickens very slightly. And if you're into thermometers, reaches a temperature of about 225 Fahrenheit. Do not do this to 225 Celsius. Alright, you only make that mistake once. And sometimes when I'm feeling dangerous, I'll just do this by eye, and I'll cook this until the mixture appears to be getting a little bit syrupy. But to be safe, because that can kind of fool you sometimes, I do suggest checking with a candy or probe thermometer. And again, I'm shooting for something that's like 225 Fahrenheit. And if everything goes according to plan, once it reaches that, your mixture should look a little something like this. At which point we will pull that off the heat and transfer that into some kind of jar used for preserves. And by the way, they say the jar should be sterilized, so I will tell you that too. But on the other hand, we are pouring a 225 degree mixture in there, so I'm not exactly sure what would live through that. But anyway, better safe than sorry. And I realize it looks super liquidy now, but don't worry, as this cools, thanks to the sugar and the natural pectins in that skin, this will thicken up beautifully. And yes, not only is this style of marmalade nice and clear, it is also one of the most beautiful colors in the history of colors. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous. And impossible to produce any other way. Or if you don't believe me, go to the paint store and try. It can't be done. But anyway, we'll let that cool down to room temp, at which point I sealed it up and popped it in the fridge overnight. And then the next day we will toast and severely butter a couple English muffins. Or if things are going really well, maybe some crumpets. And we will go ahead and spoon over some of this now beautifully thickened marmalade. And that, my friends, was just magnificent. All right, just a super intense, super pure orange flavor with virtually zero bitterness. Okay, just a very, very tiny subtle touch, which is actually very necessary to bring out all the flavors. And unlike that dreaded British-style marmalade from my childhood, the pieces of peel in this are not bitter, or white, or weirdly textured, but instead perfectly candied, tender strips of zest. And while you can definitely make this with any citrus under the sun, blood orange is by far my favorite. And not just because of the insanely beautiful color. It's because, strangely enough, of all the reasons I'm not a huge fan of fresh blood orange, since it's a little more sour and a little more bitter than a regular orange, and it's sort of a little bit reminiscent of grapefruit, which I should mention to marmalade aficionados is the ultimate citrus to use for this. But anyway, the point is you can use whatever you want, and the technique will work out just the same. And for whatever reason you do want that really stiff, really firm style marmalade, all you have to do is include all the peel instead of just the zest. But fair warning, that can also make it more bitter. But anyway, that's it. My take on blood orange marmalade, or marmalade, as apparently they call it in New Orleans. Whether you end up using blood oranges like I highly recommend here, or you do it with a different kind or kinds of citrus. Either way, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.